Hi there and welcome. My name is Gochi Shoke and I am a Microsoft Technical Trainer. In this video, we will explore migrating SQL Server workloads to Azure SQL Databases. This platform as a service, or PaaS, solution offers multiple benefits including automated backup, built-in availability, and scalability without the need of managing the underlying infrastructure. You will learn how to migrate SQL Server databases using tools like Azure SQL Migration Extension for Azure Data Studio, the Data Migration Assistant, and methods like schema and data migration. By the end of this module, you will be equipped to plan and execute a migration from on-premise SQL Server to Azure SQL databases, addressing both technical and business requirements. So let's get started with our migration journey to Azure SQL Database. Now that we explored the migration to a virtual machine, it is time to shift our focus towards the PaaS solution and migrate to an Azure SQL database. This process will equip us with the tools and knowledge needed to ensure a smooth and efficient transition, leveraging the full potential of Azure's scalable and reliable database solution. So let's go ahead and have a look at the process of migrating to Azure SQL Database, where we will look at key strategies, best practices, and the technical steps required to successfully complete this migration. We can use the Azure SQL Migration extension to migrate to an Azure SQL database. Let's say that for this example on the screen, we do an offline migration. The Azure SQL Migration extension for the Azure Data Studio is a useful tool because it will help us to assess the readiness, and Azure will recommend the resources and facilitate the migrations process. This tool is ideal for small to medium-sized database. What are the steps for the migration? Well, first we need to set it up. So we need to install the Azure Data Studio. We need to enable the migration extension as well. Then we have the discovery and assessment. We can choose databases to migrate and assess their readiness. Next, we have the Azure target. We can select an Azure account and target database. Then after that, we have the migration service. We can select or create an Azure database migration service. We have the data source configuration. We can enter the credentials, select the table that we want to migrate. And then we have the summary where we can review and start the migration process. So there's a couple of important considerations when we talk about the migration. Azure SQL databases do not support table names with double byte character. Also, migration statuses, including preparing or copying and rebuilding indexes, is not supported. Performance will depend also on the Azure SQL Database SKU. Also, the self-hosted integration runtime SKU as well. There's some consideration for performance. Because of the target on Azure SQL Database SKU and the self-hosted integration runtime host will impact the migration speed. It's recommended to scale up the Azure SQL Database compute resources before starting the migration for optimal performance. Monitoring the migration process is important for ensuring a smooth transition to Azure Data Studio. By selecting Database Migration in Progress on the migration dashboard, you can easily track all the ongoing migrations. This feature allows you to click on specific database name to access detailed information about each migration. It's important to pay attention to the migration status, which will initially show as completed and will eventually change to succeeded once the migration is fully completed. The status is key indicator for the migration success, so we want to pay attention to that one. We can also have an option to use the Azure portal for monitoring. It provides a view of the migration process, allowing us to track progress and identify any potential issue in real time. Leveraging the Azure Database Migration Service enhances capability by offering detailed insight into the migration status, performance metrics, and any issue that may arise. This approach not only helps in maintaining oversight, but also facilitates proactivity, ensuring that the migrations align with the project timelines, but also the objectives. Monitoring the migration process is important for ensuring a smooth transition to Azure Data Studio. By selecting Database Migration in Progress on the Migration dashboard, you can easily track all ongoing migration. This feature allows you to click on specific database name to access detailed information about each migration. It is important to pay attention to the migration status, which will initially show as completed to eventually change to succeeded once the migration is fully completed. The status update is a key indicator of the migration success. We also have the option to use the Azure portal for monitoring. It provides us with a view of the migration process, allowing us to track the progress and identify any potential issues in real time. Leveraging the Azure Database Migration Service enhances this capability by offering detailed insight into the migration status, performance metrics, and any issue that may arise. This approach not only helps in maintaining oversight, but also facilitates proactivity, ensuring that the migration aligns with your project timelines and objectives. You can also perform an offline migration of the database from SQL Server on-premises to an Azure SQL Database by using either the PowerShell or Azure CLI. This example on the screen is about the migration of AdventureWorks database to Azure SQL Database. The command new AZ data migration to SQL DB will help you to initiate the migration of a SQL Server database to an Azure SQL database. The parameters specify details about the source and the target databases, the authentication method, and then the migration service. The Data Migration Assistant, or DMA, is a powerful tool that facilitates the migration process to Azure SQL Database. It offers 3 different migration options tailored to different needs. The first option, Schema and Data, allows for comprehensive migration, transferring both the database structure and then the actual data. This is an ideal for a complete migration. The second option, Schema Only, is useful when you want to set up the database structure without transferring any data, perhaps for a fresh start or even just for testing purposes. And lastly, the Data Only enables you to move only the data, assuming that the schema is already in place. Understanding this option helps in the planning for an efficient migration strategy that aligns with your specific requirement. Migrating a SQL Server database to Azure SQL Database involves a sequence of action. First, you will create a new migration project, which sets the stage for the entire process. We have seen that it is very important to properly select the source and then the target databases to ensure compatibility. As you choose the schema objects for migration, consider which elements are essential for your application functionality. Then, we can generate the SQL script and then finally start the migration. The sequence of action not only streamlines the migration, but also minimizes the potential disruption to your operation. Another way to migrate Azure SQL databases is using a BACPAC file. A BACPAC file, it is containing the database schema and its data. It is used to exporting and importing databases in SQL Server and Azure SQL databases. Why should we use the BACPAC? Well, the BACPAC files are useful for migrating databases between different environments, such as from on-premises SQL Server to Azure SQL Database. What are the steps to import the BACPAC file? We can open the specific database server page in the Azure portal. On the toolbar, we select Import Database. We select the storage account and the container for the BACPAC file. We choose the BACPAC file that we want to import, and then we can specify the new database size, usually the same as the original. We provide the destination SQL Server credential. We select OK to start the import process. Then we can monitor the import's progress by opening the database server page and select import-export history under the settings. When successful, the import will have a completed status, and that's it. We are done with the import. The transactional replication is a powerful method for moving data efficiently between databases. It allows for real-time data synchronization, which is important for applications that require up-to-date information. This approach is useful in scenarios where high availability and disaster recovery are priorities. By using transactional replication, you can ensure that the changes made in the source database are quickly reflected in the target database, minimizing latency. It's also important to consider the configuration and monitoring of the replication process to maintain data integrity and then the performance. Overall, this method is a practical way to optimize migration with performance in mind. Thank you for joining me in this video on migrating SQL Server workloads to Azure SQL Database. We have covered key strategies and best practices and the technical steps required to successfully complete this migration. By now, you should have a solid understanding of how to leverage Azure SQL Database's capabilities to enhance your data platform performance, scalability, and reliability. Remember, those tools that we have seen, such as the Azure SQL Migration extension for the Azure Data Studio, and then the Data Migration Assistant, the DMA, are critical for a smooth and efficient migration process. I hope you found this module useful, and I will see you on the next one.